Actually, we took a bit of different approach when we extended our MPLS to the end of the network, because we didn't want to replace our DSLAMs, and because this might be quite expensive, replace equipment that's already there and does its job. So what we did is we just co-located small switches just in front of the DSLAMs or the MSLAMs. So it's because you said putting this functionality into the DSLAMs, but this could be quite expensive because you have all these DSL ports there and you want to use them.
Yeah, I would like to add that, you know, as a vendor who make both the DSLAMs and the routers, we got a lot of opportunity to talk to operators, including Thomas. We see that one of the main motivation for seamless MPLS comes from the need to quickly provision a service end-to-end. Because I think in the past, for example, if you have Ethernet, etc., and then Metro, and then, you know, Backbone, you know, Backbone is on an MPLS domain, Metro may be on a different MPLS domain, and then, you know, access is Ethernet. So as a result, it caused the service provisioning to become slow. Therefore, you know, some operator decided to introduce MPLS end-to-end so that you can take advantage of the signaling capability of MPLS to set up the LSP end-to-end. So, but when we look at the, say that in the existing paradigm, when Backbone has its MPLS domain, Metro has its MPLS domain, and access is Ethernet, actually, you know, just because of this doesn't mean that the service provisioning need to be slow. I think that this has a lot to do with the, for example, the IT, etc., and the network architecture. So what I want to say here is that seamless MPLS is one way to expedite service provisioning, but there are definitely other alternatives. So I think from this perspective, whether you need MPLS all the way to the DSLAM or not, I think is not entirely clear. But I do agree with one point that Hector just said, is that, you know, no solution fit all, and then in different scenarios, there may be also different requirements. Because I think that one thing is fairly clear is that if we think of the cell-side gateway as a device similar to the access, then MPLS is indeed there. So,
just one question I'd like to ask Thomas on this. We spoke about this before. Even if it is MPLS in this access portion and the MPLS later on, many of the times I've seen these networks, it's either two different operators or at least two different business units. And you can't just put it all together because one operator doesn't want the other one to see its internal topology, etc. So do you still think it makes sense in that kind of situation to try to stitch it all together, or perhaps we should do pseudo wires with stitching, or leave one Ethernet, or?
So I think if you really want to get all opportunities from the seamless MPLS, you also have to consider the organizational split of your company. But if you have the split, then you get, I think we have also considered switch PE, pseudo-wire stitching in the network, but that includes a lot of additional requirements. What about services? What about redundancy? What about switch over and so on? And the goal was to have one common aggregation, one common network for that, but also the organizational change in our company. In the past, there wasn't any communication between our aggregation people and the backbone people because there was a BIOS between them and they don't have to talk with each other. Both operated MPLS networks, but they didn't talk with each other because there was no need. And this was also a huge part of the project to integrate all the operational people from them.
Yeah, but I think that's a very important point that probably is worth noting, which is that you decided to make an organizational change. I mean, and that's what is facilitating the technological change. In the absence of that, I mean, there are organizations where the groups are very different and it's very difficult to integrate this kind of thinking. I think that's important. George?
So a couple points. One is it's very important to reduce the number of touch points in a network for provisioning, not only because you know, it takes more work to provision multiple touch points, but when you have touch points in the middle, then you have to worry about redundancy at that point. so that, it's not just a matter of configuring more things, but it's a matter of how do you support that function if this middle thing that's doing the stitching goes away. So, end-to-end seamless is very, very good. Now, Yaakov brought up 2 points. Was one, if you're going inter-provider, well, at inter-provider, you often want to go back up to the service level so you can measure the SLA across your network versus the other network. So you have a different motivation for going all the way up to the service level and having the extra touch points. And, and it eliminates some possible security issues as well, because you can filter exactly on the labels coming across and know what you're dealing with. The other point I want to make is if you have the situation where you have multiple domains within a single provider and they don't get along, well, the architecture that I was presenting this afternoon is a way that one service could tunnel through a core that, they don't particularly get along with, but you separate it across the UNI, and then you can build multiple tunnels across that thing, run an IGP, and
George,
now
you just need to hold the mic closer. I think they can't
the
get
service
your...
network begins to look like a single entity, and now you can just provision the 2 endpoints, and it will all flow across MPLS.
So Rajesh?
Yeah, it does appeal to logic that if the operators use the same common set of management tools and monitoring tools that they are used to for managing a larger part of the network, that would directly result in operational expenditure optimization. And so from an economics point of view, that does seem to be logically a better way to go. There is another aspect as well. Okay? How the traffic engineering, which in MPLS has been used for in a big way, and that is, say, the operators have been quite familiar with the traffic engineering techniques with MPLS. And that directly translates into better utilization of the network capacity. And that would again ultimately translate into better economics as well.
Okay. But I do have a point that I want to bring up. And we've all been talking about the fact that, yeah, it simplifies everything and it all looks good. But then what about there is still an operational cost. We are working with the assumption, one, that the operator is already extending MPLS outwards. That's the case of the operators here. What about operators that are not necessarily doing that? That's a challenge as well. And even if you are, you still have to provision many endpoints with MPLS. There are trade-offs involved in, maybe are you not just shifting the complexity from the network to the provisioning?
I think it's everything is end up in the size of the network, because if it's a small network in terms of city carriers, so probably extension of MPLS will be very pragmatical. Very large network, when you have a lot of install base, or you have already demarcation devices that capable just upgrading software and having this functionality, or you're going to chapter 11 probably. So that's the fact. So gradually, when new projects will go to the reality, and you will see that the extension will be pragmatic in terms of design and also implementation, this is something that definitely will take probably more than 10 years in a reality. Today, economically, again, it's something that is viable, especially when looking on the small operators. For very large networks, I believe that it will not pass the management part of the company.
Thomas?
It's a hard task to put it really on the street for that, and I think it will also be a very long curve to start with, to go up in the field for that.
Okay, at this point, I have multiple questions going through my head. I'm assuming there is audience members who have some questions going through their head. So if there are questions that the audience wants to shoot at the panel, I think this would be a good time to get that process started. So if there's somebody in the audience who has something they'd like to ask the panelists, I think please come up, please raise your hand. Things that have been bubbling through your head as you heard the presentations the entire day today and what you've heard so far. Okay, there's a question there.
Hi, Dave Allen. One of the hats I wear is co-chairing the architecture committee at the Broadband Forum, and been doing that kind of since the dawn of time. And we've been through ATM PVCs. We now have Ethernet. We're not really, we have I did a presentation on Tuesday discussing some of what's relevant actually to this particular panel, which is how close to the edge is MPLS going to come? And one of the challenges to this is you get things like outside plant, VDSL devices that only serve a footprint of maybe 40 homes past. And so it's going to be hard to get a control plane out that far easily, which means we're back to a PVC world, and I'm not seeing a lot of incentive to do that. So I'll just sort of suggest that to the panel as a data point, and perhaps invite comments in response to that. Thank you.
Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, actually, it's reminding the LAN emulation of ATM to the desktops that somehow it
Just now it'll be to the iPhone.
So Dave, I mean, is your point that we are not going to see MPLS go that far out based on your vision as from the broadband perspective, or?
I wouldn't describe that as based on my visions, however how induced. That's more sort of just the reality that I'm seeing.
Okay. Yeah, and that also brings up an aspect of what I want to bring in is technological maturity and interoperability. So, yeah, MPLS in the core, we've gone through it, we've understood that, we know how to do it. But when you start taking it to the access, or you start introducing things like MPLS TP, I mean, we don't really have a whole lot of interoperability. And I think there will be some comments from at least one of the operators, and maybe some operators here who have experienced that, as to what are the issues with that. And that takes up a lot of time, and that's also a time-consuming process.
I mean, when you go with the MPLS to the access, you sometimes need a larger variety of different devices, smaller devices actually for smaller POPs, and you may run in some interop problems because LDP isn't LDP. So you can be pretty sure that if you put in just devices from the same vendor, it will just work. But if you have a device from vendor A and device from vendor B, they might, in some cases, not react in the way you like. So there are interoperability issues, and especially when installing the new network, you will run into those.
No, also as we push it further and further out to the access, the variety of devices is going to go up. And in the core, or even in the large metro core, you can have a single set of devices, but in the access, that is certainly not the case.
Yeah, and I think I spoke about it in my slides just before, that the interop issue is really, really important. Perhaps I'm looking from a different point of view than some of the larger vendors, but I have to talk to everybody. I can't assume that there's going to be a network based only on my devices. Maybe some other people can do that. And once you get out further and these devices are getting small and inexpensive, then you really can't beat things that are out there like Ethernet, which have been tested over and over again. Now, MPLS maybe in principle can be simpler in many ways, but this interrupting will just kill you.
Hector?
Well, I think if we come back to the early stage of IP/MPLS, I mean, we had interoperability issues, but we have been solving this out. So we're talking about a new technology just emerging, evolving, not yet implemented in many areas, but that will be solved, so that shouldn't be an issue. I would like as well to bring up one point, that MPLS end-to-end is not just about seamless MPLS, so you were saying like, what about the other discussions? There is also MPLS TP, which has been emerging, and still people don't understand very much and do mistakes, like you were mentioning, Yaakov, sorry, but you were putting like MPLS TP and signaling, putting issues on LDP signaling where MPLS TP doesn't have LDP signaling, so there's no that security issue from that perspective. But I think the MPLS end-to-end as well addresses MPLS TP on some specific networks where can benefit from the transport-oriented functionality that it brings.
Sure.
And in these cases as well, we can end up in the situation where we need to terminate and integrate MPLS TP with IP/MPLS, sure, like Telecom Italia was requesting in his presentation, and many other customers who are deploying this technology will be needing to do this.
Just one point on that. Of course, TP doesn't mandate